you have three choices. This is bad, this is good, or it just is. I like the just is because then you can look at the perception of what is this in my life and how can I benefit from it? But before you do that, great question to ask yourself is, why am I protecting myself at this moment in time? If you can ask that question, write that down. Why am I protecting myself at this moment in time? Because this event, this person, this situation is representation of the thousands of other things that happen to you, trying to get your attention to help you within you to figure out how can I use this to benefit myself so I can go to the next level, the thing that I truly want, but you're not seeing it as an answer, you're seeing it as a detriment.
Welcome. Here's something to get a little bit curious about. What if the very thing that made you successful is now exactly the same thing that has you feeling stuck, burned out, or maybe even sort of secretly hollow? Every one of us will at some point in time come to see that the behaviors we're doing, maybe just a specific behavior, is actually not in our own best interest. Our upcoming guest discovered something that redefines how we think about this concept of sabotage. We're all familiar with it, but it's not a mindset flaw. It's not a lack of willpower. But according to our guest, it's a trait that you are born with. One that protects you, or started out protecting you, and now quietly sort of chokes out your potential. Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I advise high-performing leaders and organizations how to harness their emotional source code to purposely transform their tribe. Today on the Dov Baron Show, our guest for the next two episodes is Dr. Philip Agrios. In what might seem a previous life, Philip was running a thriving medical practice when a personal crisis forced him to walk away. What followed was a profound unraveling and in many ways sort of the birth of a breakthrough, a blueprint hidden in nature itself that shows exactly how we sabotage ourselves and how to stop. He calls this inborn sabotaging trait. It's not just learned, it's inborn. He says it's hardwired reflex that every human being carries. You don't think about it, you don't choose it, it just runs you. Moreover, it's why no matter how many books you read, how many masterminds you join, how many morning routines you crush, you can still end up feeling like something's off. Well, there is an antidote. More on that in a moment. You're tuned into the Dov Baron Show. Each episode is an exploration into the minds of those who are shaping the world. Every episode is a raw, unscripted collaboration between my guests and me as we dive into the truths that few have the courage to ask about. We find guests for you who are sometimes unknown to the general public, but absolute titans in their field. The kinds of people who high-profile leaders turn to when they need an edge. If you're the kind of leader who craves depth over sound bites, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is where real thinkers come to sharpen their edge. For the next two episodes, I'm sitting down with Dr. Philip Agrios, who is an expert on self-sabotage. He's a business consultant, international speaker, and best-selling author. Over the last 30 years, he committed to uncovering the hidden sabotaging trait that we're all born with and that holds us back from our success. Throughout his groundbreaking T-Now method, Dr. Philip Agrios empowers individuals to instantly switch off this trait, helping them break through self-sabotage and achieve lasting success in both their personal and professional lives. So, ladies and gentlemen, please turn up the volume and help me to welcome Dr. Philip Agrios. Welcome,
Hey,
sir.
Dov. Thank you, sir. Great to see you, Dov. Thank you so much for inviting me on. Appreciate it.
It's such a pleasure. Is it a full year ago since we met? It must be close, right?
Yeah, about 9 months ago, yeah.
It's a long time ago, and you and I had this conversation. We were both at a mastermind together. We had this conversation, and I don't think either of us really knew what the other one did, and then it was like, oh, that's very interesting. And what was interesting to me is because a lot of people talk about sabotage, but don't really understand it. They talk about it in a mindset sense. They talk about it in a lack of willpower sense. They talk about it in a self-sabotaging from not understanding what you're really driving towards. You had a different point of view. If you were to sort of summarize it, what is it? And then we'll sort of get deeper into it.
Sure. Over those 30 years, researching thousands and thousands of people, what I was able to understand that self-sabotage is just self-protection. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not an idiot or a loser or all the other 100 words we say to ourselves. You're just protecting yourself from the very success that you're seeking, because subconsciously that success is harder to achieve and sustain. So we go back doing the same thing over and over again, really wanting to get to that point, but we get stuck. And so many people who have achieved, and those of you might be even listening here, you achieved that success and all of a sudden you find yourself losing it. And now you're never going to get back to that point because subconsciously it's more painful to get to that point. So it's just protecting you. And that's where the light bulb went off my brain, looking back of all the things that happened to me. And it just made sense to me.
And we want to go into that because I think that, again, it's very easy to draw a large swath over these things, but it's really understanding that you can have a level of success and be fine with it, but that next level is somehow you're going to sabotage it. You can have enormous amounts of success and try to have success in another area and somehow sabotage it. You could have massive success in your business and terrible relationships. There's all different ways that this protection mechanism is going on. And I want to underline that, underscore that protective mechanism. So think about sabotage as a protective mechanism. That's what Phil's talking about here. And that's what we're really going to go into. But before we do, let's talk about how you came to this, because you were successful. You had a very successful medical practice, functional medicine, chiropractic, etc. You were looked at with great esteem. And then sabotage. Tell us about it. Walk us through how you got to that part of your delicious journey.
Yeah, it was an interesting time over those couple of decades. Things all started from a false accusation from an insurance company. And I emphasize false accusation. That three things were going to happen to me. I was going to go to jail. I was going to have to pay back 3 times what the insurance company gave back to me. And I was going to lose my license. And this is all during the time where we just had my father diagnosed with brain cancer, a very healthy man. But 7 months later, he passed. And then I became the primary caretaker of my mom. After 7 years later, she passed. During this whole episode, I had became disabled. I could not practice. The stress was so high that it caused me to create 2 major conditions called carpal tunnel syndrome in both hands and a thing called thoracic outlet syndrome, causes weakness and numbness on both hands. I would wake up and I would numbness, but I would get out of bed and I felt like I was walking on glass. It was just this whole autoimmune situation that was happening. And I was in my late 30s. And I actually had to lose my practice. I had a multidiscipline clinic. I had medical doctors working for me and a whole slew of things. And things just started coming down. But as we said, it was a false accusation. There was never a smear on me, but it took a few years to offset that. And on top of that, then I went through a major divorce. I went through financial ruin, 2008. I don't know if that rings a bell to anybody. Lost all my properties.
Nobody can relate to that.
Right. Other things happening. One of my daughters almost tried to commit suicide. It was just a whole slew of things that happened. But I realized all of it. I have really no regret. People look at me like I'm nuts. I don't, because if it wasn't for all that, I would have never been able to discover what I'd been able to discover. So it kind of broke it down to a point, bring this up and saying, why is this happening? Where's the light at the end of the tunnel? And over the time and researching thousands of people trying to figure out what's happening with that, I remember closing that door, locking my practice door after 15 years of practice. And then, like, what the heck is going to happen? But things just started happening.
So before we get into that, though, I want to just backtrack a bit here because there was a lot there. In simple terms, you were going through a shitstorm because it's one thing that your dad, who's healthy and suddenly diagnosed and then he passes. And you got your mom who you got to take care of. And you've got this wrongful accusation that is threatening your business at every possible level. You've got a daughter who tries to commit suicide. You've got a marriage that goes down the toilet. That's enough for most people to go, okay, hands up, I'm done. I'm done.
Right.
So at that point, that wouldn't seem like I'm sabotaging myself. That would seem like if there's a God, he just took a dump on my life. It would seem like, I'm living in a shitstorm, like it's bad luck, quote unquote. So as these things are happening, that's over several years you're talking about. Is there a point in that where you're going, I've had enough, I'm out?
Oh, absolutely.
So I want people to get that, because I think it's very easy to go, well, it's just this, or it's just that, or it's just that. But these things stack on us. So talk to us about that sense of wanting to just throw in the towel.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's more to that too, as well.
Oh, I'm
right?
sure.
And no, what reason why I'm saying that is because some of it was I had to go through it. The other one was because of the decisions I made based out of fear and other things, not knowing what I know today. Right.
Right. So when you have this shitstorm happening, you start thinking in a certain way that becomes the catalyst for more bad things. Is that correct?
Yeah. And one of the things that really held me through this was that life doesn't happen to you. It happens from you, through you, and for you. It's so easy to say, right?
Let's put a pause in that, because that's a bit too new agey. And the reason I say that is for no other reason other than out of respect for somebody who's in that place. Because I know I went through a shitstorm, and if somebody had said that to me, I would have wanted to punch them in the neck, right?
Yeah. And one of the things is you want to go into why me. And once in a while, when I did say that, I was like, freaking enough. Okay. I would just say, why not you? You have to go through this because of this. And there are times where I was just like, I'm done. But things kept on coming to me to kind of keep on pushing me forward and me forward. And then when you find something that nobody else found, and then you start really focusing on this like this, it was an obsession to a point where I needed to understand what this was.
So the obsession was in trying to understand why it was happening to you?
As well as what this thing I was discovering, because there's nothing like this in the world. And because of that, you have to go through all this stuff in order for you to get down to that point. You're creating different ways of looking at life, and you are trying to prove it scientifically. So now you have to go teach yourself quantum physics and other things like that, and other things. But it was just like this download at many times, just knowing that, okay, this has happened for a reason. And one of the things, if I may, was that I used to say, I wonder what gift I'm getting. I wonder what gift I'm getting. Oh, gee, I wonder what this is going to give me. And I realized later down the road,
chill out, I don't need any more gifts.
Right, exactly. That I realized the adversity was my gift, that I had the gift. It was up to me to find the benefit out of it. And that's why I want to hear those of you who are going through some major stuff. You have three choices. This is bad, this is good, or just is. I like the just is, because then you can look at the perception of, what is this in my life and how can I benefit from it? But before you do that, great question to ask yourself is, why am I protecting myself at this moment in time? If you can ask that question, write that down. Why am I protecting myself at this moment in time? Because this event, this person, this situation is representation of the thousands of other things that happen to you, trying to get your attention to help you within you to figure out, how can I use this to benefit myself so I can go to the next level, the thing that I truly want. But you're not seeing it as an answer, you're seeing it as a detriment.
Right. So let's jump on that for a minute. So all these things are piling up, and having been down that road, as you have obviously, it doesn't feel like I'm protecting myself at that moment. It feels like I'm being brutalized by an external force or external forces. Mm-hmm. So help the person watching, listening to us, get their head around this idea that to even consider that this might be a protective mechanism, because it doesn't even have a whiff of that at the time you're in it. It feels the other way, like maybe I'm a victim of it. Because if I'm in a protective mechanism, then I'm doing something, I'm in charge, as opposed to it's happening to me. So help us to sort of get an understanding around this protective mechanism when I feel like I'm a victim of.
Yeah, because you're looking at it as this is something like God or the universe is pissed off at me, or I'm getting punished, or this stuff always happens to me. And one of the things at that moment is very hard when you're in that moment, but when you get less emotionally charged, is something looking at it that both are happening at the exact same time. The benefit and the detriment happening at the exact same time. It depends on which side you want to look at. For instance, life is falling apart. Yeah, but if you look at the other end, it's also falling together. It has to come together. If you're living in the northern hemisphere during wintertime and you're sick and tired of the cold, well, guess what's happening? On the other side, summer's happening. So both are happening to us at the exact same time. It depends on which side I want to look at. So those of you who can't see me but can hear, Dov, what are you looking at? My front hand or the back of my hand?
I'm looking at the palm of your hand.
Right, palm of the hand. Can you see the back of my hand?
I know it's there, but I can't see it.
But if I turn it, now you see the back of my hand.
But I cannot see the palm.
So let's say my palm is fear, but on the opposite end, let's say it's trust.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm seeing trust, I can't fear. But what I'm fearing, I can't trust. They are there. They're both there. Everything is within you. You're the mass murderer, you're Mother Teresa. You're the ugly person, you're the beautiful person. You're the hateful person, you're the loving person. Everything is within you. It is up to you what you want to tap into to show yourself in the world.
So absolutely, we have a shadow self. We've talked about that many times on this show. Part of yourself that you keep in the shadows that you don't want to see. And there is, those of you who've done work with me know that to be integrated, you must be able to see both the shadow and the light. You've got to be able to recognize the murderer within you and the Mother Teresa within you. However, when you say this need to, quote, sabotage, which is what we call it, is an inborn thing to protect ourselves, what would you say in the simplest way is that we're trying to protect ourselves from? Because again, it doesn't feel like I'm trying to protect myself from being more successful, but I can see that I sabotage myself being more successful. It doesn't seem to me that I'm trying to protect myself from a loving relationship, but I can see that I, quote, sabotage this loving relationship. So talk to us about this inborn that you're talking about.
So the inborn sabotaging trait, which I call it, is the very thing that is protecting us. So let's think about the domino masters. They set up this whole domino thing, right? And you push this one domino and it goes, shh. Let's say the last thing that's released are balloons.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's the last thing you see? The balloons.
Of course.
The balloons are the imposter syndrome, your procrastination, you overly giving to others who take advantage of you, your scatteredness and can't finish something, your inability to express at that moment and holding things in. All the other thousands of things that you're doing last. So what do? We take our coping methods and put them where? We put them on the balloons, not the one domino.
Mm-hmm.
So what's easier? Hold down all the balloons and stop pushing the damn domino. That domino is the inborn sabotaging trait that is the true reason why every negative emotion that you experience and feel is from that trait. And that's causing the balloons. So what do? Do you hold down the balloons or stop pushing the domino? You stop pushing it, which goes down the road of frustration and desperation. But if you think about pushing it the other side and another whole domino set kicks in, and let's say it's fireworks, that's growth. Because there's only two things we do as humans. We protect and we grow. We contract, we expand, we give and take. We're vibrational beings. So depending on which side you are looking at, perceiving it, and using, you can go down a road of frustration and desperation, or you can go down the road of inspiration, motivation, and growth. And what we found was that what we call the antidote is the exact opposite of the inborn sabotaging trait. It's that hand, the palm and the back of the hand. When you push one way, the saboteur kicks in to protect you. So for instance, you are yelling and screaming at your children, okay? You're protecting not only yourself from being stressed out, but you're trying to protect them from, let's say, something that they're doing stupidly. You're arguing with your spouse. At that moment, it doesn't mean that you don't love each other, but you're protecting each other from that moment because that's why you're arguing. Whether it's anything other than that, anything out of the flow and things are going well, you're just protecting yourself at different levels, whether it's a 1 up to a 10. So when you look at that, when we see how that it's there for us to consciously shift, when we found that the T now method, which is the T stands for transcend, that at that moment when you use the T now method, you can transcend any adversity, no matter how big or small, instantly. So when you use your antidote, it is impossible to self-sabotage yourself. It is impossible to go into that protection, but you need to go into growth. Now, it doesn't mean you fully go into growth and you get rid of your inborn sabotage trait. You can't get rid of it. It's your protection. Even if you could get rid of it, it'd be stupid, right?
Mhm.
But at that moment, you are consciously using it. So as you start to release your personal professional power and you hit that wall, the saboteur kicks in because you're at that uncomfortable level, whether it's small or large, it depends on how much you contract. But imagine knowing that one trait that's causing you to stop and kind of like, oh no, what's going to happen now? And use what we call the antidote. Instantaneously, you can go into growth. So now you're growing and then contracting a little bit, growing and now you're doing that compared to the continual hamster wheel over and over again and getting stuck and never getting past that. So that's what we're really talking about, how the inborn sabotage trait is kicking in to protect you. It's there to help you to get through things, to be cautious, but not to a point of being fearful that you can't move forward.
So what was the moment for you in your story when you realized this, when this became evident to you?
Oh, I've dated this many a times, but each moment when I really understood what my inborn sabotage trait, it was at that moment I went, this can't be this simple. I remember sitting on my living room floor, and when I discovered the exact thing what was happening with me, and I looked at everything that's ever happened in my life from what I can remember, I realized this trait was the reason of my making decisions that just didn't work for me. And it was that point where it was at a point when it really smacked me, was that during my divorce, going through everything and just everything was happening, I just signed my decree. I was like, here, take it. I don't care. Just leave me alone. I'm done. Here, 4 months later, 2008 hit and I lost everything. And now I still had to pay the same amount. And I went, why did that happen? And then I realized this was the trait. And I went, oh my God. And then I realized this is what is happening with my practice and my business and my personal life and everything else. And at that moment, I realized maybe there is something to this. And then I went out to start looking at it with family, friends, patients.
Well, what made you realize that it was an inborn trait? What was the moment in your life, in the experience, when you went, oh, this is inborn?
Because 10 years or 15 years later, 20 years later, the same people that I know, whether patients, whatever, they would come to me with a problem. And it was always because of their inborn trait. Always, 30 years later. And then I realized I started working with little children. Clients would have problems with their kids. And I started to see the same mechanism where they're 1 or 2 years old, that we could determine what their sequence was when they were a child. And then when I would share that with my client and they would do whatever, they would understand it. Then I thought about it. It was the same thing going back and forth, where even with infants, certain things that they were doing, that's where I can see it.
So walk us through an example of that, Phil, because it's a bit nebulous right now. Walk us through that so that we can see that clearly. You've got the experience and you understand it,
Right.
but it's still not very clear for the rest of us.
Absolutely. So there are 3 inborn traits. Out of 7.8 billion people, there are 3 traits that we're born with. So within us are what we call the director trait, the supplier trait, and the communicator trait. That's what I named each of the traits that make up who we are. As humans, we direct, communicate, and supply. That's all we do, just those 3 things. And when I took those 3 traits and I placed them in a sequence called the protective sequence, I realized there were only 6 sequences of human behavior. So there's really only 6 types of people in the world. And when I understood someone's sequence, I could tell them everything that was happening at that moment in the present, but I would go back in the past and tell them why they did what they did. And then during a time, as we started talking to them 5 years, 10 years, when I started knowing them, that sequence never changed. It never, ever changed. And then what we would do is I would like, okay, let's try this out on little kids. And what we're finding out was that parents who had 3, 4 children, when we determined each of the children's sequence at little as 1 to 2 years old, we could see this was the sequence. And as time went on, as they became older, the sequence never changed.
So when you say the sequence, this is how that person operates.
Yes, how they protect themselves and how they actually succeed. So when we understood that sequence, it really gives us the ability to understand that this one sequence is what we're born with. And then comes the traumas and everything and the experiences to kind of reinforce, to help that person to determine what that sabotaging trait is. And hopefully they can figure out their antidote.
So how does somebody begin to assess the sequence they use through those 3 characters?
Yeah. So we have a 9-question quiz that our clients take, and they're able to determine that through our programs. I can talk with somebody and within a minute or less can understand their sequence and then tell them everything about that. And I've done this on different podcast shows, especially with 2 podcasters, the partners, and I would tell them on the show live how each of them would relate to each other and conflict with each other. And they were blown away by how accurate it was without even knowing who they were. So that's how we are able to determine through 9 questions.
So give us some of that, if you could, so that our listeners, our viewers can have a sense of it.
Sure. So for instance, those of you who are listening that maybe are business owners or sales professionals, have you ever knew a sales professional talk themselves out of a sale?
Absolutely. Might have done that once or twice myself.
Exactly. So I work with a lot of VP of sales because I actually discovered a 6-step sequence to increase their sales and their closing rates. And it's always because the inborn sabotage trait is actually stopping them from selling. And I would ask them with this person, what would you start to do with this person? And the majority of times is they need communication skills. They need to learn how to communicate better. And I'm like, that's their superpower. That's what they do great. The reason why they're over talking is because their superpower is trying to show them how valuable they are, or they're scattered all over the place. So depending on their saboteur, so let's say the saboteur is the one that's scattered all over the place. The reason why they're all over the place and feeling uncomfortable is that superpower is tripping them up because they're not focusing on following an outline, or they're not really understanding what to do. Now they're vomiting on that person. If they have the trait that they don't value themselves and they overly give and they want to overly share. You hear people that overly share, especially those of you who give products away for free that you shouldn't, because you want to show the value in it, which actually devalues you on a subconscious level mainly. So what happens is they are now overly communicating because they're trying to show the value.
Mm-hmm.
So the very thing that they think is their strength is actually tripping them up. And what we were able to do is by using the antidote, their saboteur would become more effective, which would then cause them not to overly communicate and become more effective in that way. So we look at that sequence as like a seesaw, where let's say the superpower is the kid that's up in the air on the seesaw. Okay, so it's made up of 3 traits. And then the fulcrum, which is between that in the middle, is the bridge. And then from there, we have the saboteur, and they work in that kind of conjunction. So at that moment, when they're overly talking, it is because their saboteur is kicking in to protect them. So that's why they're over talking. At the same time, those type of people can actually ignore people and shut down, but not as long as they would communicate. So that would be one person.
So just to making sure I'm understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm hearing is that the thing that we might see as a superpower, as I'm really great at, is actually the thing that we're going to use in a way to sabotage ourselves of getting to the result we want.
Yes, because we're thinking that's helping us to get through that or forcing something.
That thing may well be great. It may be a fantastic thing. It may be very useful, but at the same time, overly doing it, overly leaning on it is what makes the weakness. So if your strength is analytical,
right,
and you overuse your analytical, you can't emotionally connect with anybody. Is that an example of it?
Right. Those are the people who overthink. They overthink everything, and they have a hard time getting out of their structure based on whatever their saboteur is, because they're like, I need to manage this person. I really need to micromanage them. I need to show them the structure is way to go. Then we have the other people that are overly sensitive. They're too sensitive, where people kind of get their feelings hurt very easily and things like that. So they're trying to help people feel better, be more this way, trying to make people feel more charismatic, but they're overly feeling at times. is because their saboteur is not causing them to balance out that to be. So it all depends on the situation. And then they can be talking a little bit too much. So on a scale of 1 to 10, so then maybe they're at a 7, not too bad, but they're still overwhelming someone compared to them being at a 10. So it all varies depending on that moment, but it's always comes down to this one sequence. And once they understand the sequence and once they understand how to shift it instantaneously, we've seen people increase their closing rates within a week that had that situation, increase sales tremendously because then they're realizing why they're over talking and overwhelming the person.
Beautiful. Well, we're already at the end of part 1 of the show, and I want to make sure that people can find out more about you, about your book, about your resources. So please tell people how they can find out more about you, Phil.
Yeah, they can go to thetnowmethod.com, thetnowmethod.com, and then they have an opportunity to, if they're a business owner, executive, to go have a conversation with us, or if not, they have an access to our membership.
Fabulous. Of course, we'll make sure that that is posted in the show notes, and all the links to Phil's social will be there as well, so you can find all of those things there. We're going to be back in just one click for more of our delicious conversation with Dr. Philip Agrios. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you could stop sabotaging. Maybe not stop sabotaging, but maybe reconsider what you're actually doing isn't there to screw things up, but maybe it's protecting you. We're going to be back in just one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with Dr. Philip Agrios. He is a self-sabotage specialist, business consultant, international speaker, and best-selling author. For the last 30 years, he's committed to uncovering the hidden sabotage trait that he says we're all born with. It's inherent in us. And he has a method for not only finding it, but how to deal with it. It's called the T-Now method. And we've been talking about that in part 1, about what it actually is and why we sabotage ourselves and how to not feel like a victim, which is easy. Believe me, I'm not saying it's just you. I've been there too. But what is that transformation that takes place? Because it's very easy for people to say, oh, well, this is going on. Just look at the bright side. You or I might want to scream at that person. Well, you're not in this shit. You don't know what it's like. So we need a structure, a way to understand what is actual self-sabotage. We know now it's self-protection. So now let's take this into the next level of this. Let's walk it into the real world, Phil. And so walking this into the real world, do you have a case study, somebody that would never have guessed that they were running some sort of self-protection, that you walk them through your process and then you gave them the antidote and it was transformational? And we can do that in parts, of course.
Sure. One that comes to mind was a 12-tour veteran, and he had severe PTSD.
Sure.
High-end CEO, very successful. But he came to me. I met him at a networking, and he was just like, things are going well, but I'm just getting stuck at times, and this PTSD is really affecting my life and my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
So as we were going through it, and he went through the program, we found out that one of his saboteurs is the one that he's scattered all over the place. He doesn't finish things. He thinks too quickly, many things like that. And during the process, what we found was really cool. When we had our one-on-one, he stated that it was like 3 weeks in to the program, he was able to go dancing with his wife for the first time. Now, people may think, what's wrong with that? Well, you're going through that many tours, you're in a hyper defense system. And to go out, he would think that he was in battle.
Yes.
So he had a problem just doing that.
So it sounds like he obviously had PTSD, but it sounds like he also had ADHD going on with that, right?
Right. That's one of the traits.
And so if you're in that PTSD state, as you know, if you're a regular listener, we've talked much about that, that you're in a state of hypervigilance, super awareness of everything going around you. You have to be aware of everything. And if you're going to be aware of everything, it's not possible to be relaxed. And you might not be the greatest dance partner. Your partner might be like, could you show up a little bit here? So walk us through the process of analyzing him, helping him to understand what he was doing, and then take us to the antidote, because that seems like a huge leap to go to the other place.
Well, his superpower was talking. He can communicate very well. And what he was able to do was, when he was in that situation of trying to get the business going and in that hyper moment, that sequence is all about just doing. They do. And then with the saboteur, then later go, why did I do that? They get very emotional into that action. And when he was realizing when he was using the antidote, now I'm going to give you the antidote. It's going to sound so simple. And that's why for 30 years I get them saying this can't be the simple. But he goes much, much deeper. But his is to become aware and follow through. And once he started to become aware and follow through.
And follow through, okay.
And one of the things was that when he would overly talk, what would happen was, and overly do, he wasn't aware that he was doing it. And as he started to subconsciously understand what he was doing and was able to shift it, his effectiveness as a CEO with all his employees became such more clear. He was more clear in his communication. The same thing happened in his personal life, because your personal and your professional are one.
Of course.
And when you use your saboteur, both are affected at the same time. And when you use your antidote, you affect both at the same time. And his communication with his wife, where he would then snap at her and go into those different things, becoming aware of, hey, this is what I'm doing. It's not her. I'm treating her like a pincushion instead of a soundboard. But he was just being in defensive. He was protecting himself at that moment. He was trying to explain himself and doing all these things. And then once he realized that he was too afraid to go out to go dancing, and as he went out, he was so grateful that he realized, wow, I just kept on using my antidote when I was out there. I was aware that this is not Iraq. I'm aware that I'm not a battlefield. Okay, let's just take step by step. And one of the big epiphanies that he had, I told him, you're using your 4 letters, PTSD, as a crutch.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those of you at PTSD would probably want to come over and strangle me, but let me explain. That sequence, when you use it in one way, it's what we call the protective sequence. The PTSD is the same thing he does as his protective sequence. So when he goes into that protective mode, PTSD, it doesn't have to be always a 10. It could be less that. It's still a protection. He's still holding back over talking, or then he'll just disconnect from people and not talk to them for a couple of days. He went, oh my God, that PTSD is exactly my protective sequence. I do this, this, and this every time. Every time he goes into PTSD, he realized the sequence was so accurate. So what he has to do, well, that's that subconscious. But on the conscious level, as he started to do the antidote and shifted the opposite way, he was able to take control of that and move forward and act differently and more effectively.
So when you talk about the antidote, that sounds like a mindset. It sounds like a mindset of, if I do this, I know that that leads to the sabotage, so I'll do that instead. What I know from my 30, 40 years of working this is mindset doesn't work in the moment. It works post. So you can look at it and you go, oh yeah, I did that shit. I wish I hadn't done that shit, but I did that shit. That's different than being able to apply something in the present. So help us to understand the application in the moment, because that's the difficult part.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant question. Here's where I thought it was the same thing until I started to get into the other 2 traits. So that particular trait is a mindset trait. That trait governs your mind. The other trait, which comes into overly giving and overly focusing, and I can't be selfish, so I have to give, I can't take for myself. That's a feel set.
Mm-hmm.
That comes from the gut,
Mm-hmm.
because that particular trait governs the gut.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk with somebody that has that saboteur and you say feel and all the words that we give to them that associate with that on a subconscious level gets them to do things. compared to the other one that we just talked about that was more on mindset. The third one is heart set. Okay. That's the person coming from expression and things like that. So we know, you've read the book, The Second Brain, right? Your gut is your second brain that can work actually independently from the brain in certain areas because you're coming from the feel. I feel different things. Well, mind math found that the heart also has neurites where the heart can separately work without the brain. And those type of people need to come from their heart. And that then subconsciously is able for them to shift more effectively. So I always say only a third of the population needs mindset. The others don't. That's why a lot of times mindset doesn't work because they don't need it. They need the other sets.
So we've all met the person who can put their mind to it and do amazing things because they are from that mindset character. But there are other people who have the intuition, the gut sense about things, and they are the other people who just, they know in their heart. And as you said, as the Heart Math Institute has shown, the heart has its own neurons. It is a separate brain. You have neurons in your gut as well. All three places, as well as your brain, all have neurons. The highest amount of dopamine you produce is in your gut, not in your brain. And so start thinking about it that way. Each one of these is an important factor. The gut and the heart don't have to go through the analysis process that the head goes through because it doesn't have that prefrontal cortex or, for that matter, the amygdala putting it in fear. It's very instant. So how does a person say, okay, well, I've got it. I'm not a mindset kind of person, or I am a mindset person. How do they go, I recognize I am or I'm not something, and then tap into that to stop sabotaging themselves or tap into one of the other two characteristics to help themselves?
So let me give you an example. I had a manager take one of my workshops and he came up to me. He really understood it. It was helping him tremendously. And he says, my son's always upstairs playing video games. I can't get him downstairs to interact with the family. What do I do? So at that moment, I asked him a few questions. We ascertained his son's sequence. Okay, never met the son. And then within a week, he started doing exactly what I told him to do by using his antidote and also his son's antidote, and didn't tell the son anything. He was just doing it on a subconscious level with him. Within a week, his son was downstairs interacting with the family. And within a couple of months, their relationship skyrocketed. Why? He was the one that was giving. He was kind of making fun of his son. He was trying to help his son because that's how he grew up. Mm-hmm. But because his son was the heart one, it pushed him actually into the room. He was the one pushing his son back into the room. Mm-hmm. And once he realized that and started to feel differently, instead of just do, and communicate to his son using his superpower, as he started to feel differently about this, his son would then be able to act and initiate things and come through his heart. And then that's how they started to meld together.
I think you've got to create space for people. Is what you're saying, right?
Once you understand the other person's sequence, whether it's your child, even a teenager, okay, to everything else, once you understand that person's sequence, there's no longer judgment. It's now understanding and compassion because now you know why they're stuck as much as you are.
So let's walk this now into the professional world. I'm a CEO, manager, whatever it might be, a leader of some form, who is dealing with an employee. Let's say the employee is really good at what they do, but not great for the culture. So that they're very effective at what they do, but culturally they're somewhat toxic. Not because they're a horrible person, it's just their style is off for us. Let's work with that potential personality. What would you say to that leader, that manager, that individual to try and help them deal with this other person?
Great question. I'm laughing because I do this all the time.
Right, good.
Because people in my program, they're like, I'm having a problem with this employee. I would ask them a couple of questions. We ascertain their sequence. We tell them exactly what they do. They come back, oh, it worked great. So I remember one of my clients, they had a particular gentleman that was exactly the same way. And they were working in more of, her hands were as tied as much that she couldn't really do as much as she wanted to do because of the upper corporation. So once she understood why he was doing what he was doing, I would tell her to start using certain words to tap into his antidote to help offset him and not be so protective. And as she started to do that, we saw a change in not only with him to her, but also within the corporation, because she was actually helping him to understand why he was acting that way. And it came down to protecting himself in certain situations, but because he had this perception that everybody was against him, but they were against him because how he was acting. Once she understood why he was doing what he was doing, she was able to help him change the way he was interacting in the office.
So we get that. But for the listener who is saying, I have this problem, what do I do? I'm working with Bob or Betty, who is fantastic at what they do, but a pain in the ass to work with. What do I do, Phil?
So in this case, this person had the same sequence as that manager. So what was happening is that she was good at what she was doing, but she wasn't expressing herself. She didn't express herself. So she would sit kind of unemotional, helping and just doing what she was doing. She was great. But when she interacted with people, she didn't like small talk. She didn't like to interact with people as much because they're just a pain in the ass to him. He would say that they're just a pain in the ass. And as she started to help them to understand that by him expressing himself, by him to just slowly 10%, 20% started doing certain things, he realized it wasn't as bad as he thought it was.
But how do you get him to express himself when he doesn't want to express himself because he's not safe, quote, in his head at least? He's not safe, so he's short and he's impatient or whatever it is. What are the questions?
So the questions is at that moment, when you're talking to Betty, why aren't you talking? Is Betty ignoring you? Are you this or whatever the case may be? By asking certain questions, you have to first ask why they're resisting in that particular sequence. Once she was understanding why he was doing what he was doing, then they would sit down and show him, do you think this is really conducive to where you want to be from promotions and all that? So she was able to show him how it was actually advantageous for him to start talking. We didn't want him to become a Gabby. We didn't want him to overly talk. We just wanted him to at least talk 10, 20, 30% more at times. And as he started doing that, feel more comfortable. And when he would have situations, he would go to her and go, I'm having a problem with this. What do you think I should do? And because she understood the method, the TNL method, she would then walk him through certain things that he could do based on his sequence. And through time, it helped him to actually get promoted more because he was able to now understand how to interact more, that it wasn't more of a detriment by talking. It was more of a detriment by not talking.
So I get that. The challenge is still the same, which is that, first of all, and it's no disrespect to anybody, most people are pretty unaware of why they do what they do. Most people are pretty unconscious. And when you ask them the question, why do you think you're doing this or why do you do that? The answer is, I don't know, or it's somebody else. I have no idea. It's just who I am is a very common answer. Or it's the way that he, she is with me, external force. Mm-hmm. And so I'm putting myself in the position of the manager who's frustrated with this person, very happy with their abilities, but frustrated with their inability to deal with. And it might not be that they're shut down. Maybe it's just that they're pissy with everybody or grumpy with everybody. So where I'm getting stuck here is, for my listener, is thinking about, most people won't admit the problems they have, let alone have the awareness about why they do it.
One of the things I realize is as you start to use the subconscious words of their saboteur and their antidote, they are more open to letting them know.
Give us an example of that so we understand.
So in that particular case is that why do you think that you are disrespecting John? Or why do you think John is disrespecting you?
I don't think I'm disrespecting John. I think John disrespects me.
Right. And why do you think that's the case? I don't know. Okay. So in that process, by you understanding, saying, well, what is the real key to you? Why can't you express yourself? I don't know what to say. So you would then tell that person, okay, let's come up with some things to start talking about. Now, if they're having a major argument, you get both people in.
Of course.
Or if that person is not willing at all, then there's nothing you can do no matter what technique. You can be God himself. You can't move them. For instance, I had a VP of sales. She could not get this salesperson to get higher in sales. And I said, let's go through what his sequence is. Once we're done with this, I want you to use his antidote, help him go through this process. Two things are going to happen. He will definitely increase his sales because we see it all the time, or he's not, and he needs to be let go.
Mm-hmm.
The latter happened. What was the great thing is because of her own sequence, she said, I would have dragged this out another 2, 3, 4 months. But because I realized it was also his benefit to let go of him so he could find something much more effective, that I realized that it was also me dragging this out because I didn't want to let him go. But once she realized that by even using the antidote and doing exactly what I told her to do, he wasn't increasing his sales, it was time to let him go. And as soon as she did that, within a week, she got somebody in and they crushed it. So it's for both the manager as well as the employee to help them understand why they're allowing this to have gone on for such a long time. So does that help?
Well, I think that in a relational situation, whether it's a professional relationship or otherwise, there is a facilitation of the dysfunction. There's a facilitation of the sabotage. And as a leader, we have to take responsibility for that. And so if I'm Charlie's boss and Charlie's sabotaging, I have to have a level of responsibility to that, which is to call on Charlie to say what's going on and how's it going on, maybe walking through your sequence. But at the same time, also understand that some people have no interest in changing.
Mm-mm.
And I think that that's the challenge where a lot of leaders get stuck is that, well, I'm going to use the T-now method, or I'm going to use the Schwingle-Schwungle method, or whatever it is, and it doesn't work. And there's a point where you've also got to be a great enough leader to say, I'm willing to help someone who wants to be helped. I'm not willing to help someone who is committed to taking a dump on the doorstep. It's not helping anybody or anything. It's better to let them go because, in fact, there's a pretty good chance that person's in not just the wrong job, but maybe even the wrong career.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen business owners help them fire clients because I'm like, this is not working for you. And as soon as they were able to fire that client, we would see like in a few days or even a couple of weeks, they would bring in higher quality clients because they're realizing they kept that person because based on their own saboteur.
Exactly.
Once they realized they had more value, the business owner, and let them go, then things would attract differently. And I see that all the time. As you change you, as you start changing your vibration and how you're viewing yourself in the outside world, then new people, things, and events have to come in to reinforce that new vibration.
It's a fascinating thing that when you talk about sabotage is we create these false glass ceilings for ourselves to bang into. We're aspirational for something much higher than the glass ceiling, but we'll bang ourselves into it because we don't really know what's on the other side of that. And so, yeah, you keep a shitty client or a shitty employee rather than saying, you know, I'm not the person for this, or they're not the person for this. I remember the first time I fired a client, God, that's 30 odd years ago, but I was just terrified of doing it because I was terrified, A, I was going to lose that money, and B, that person was going to say something bad about me.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you that I did fire the person, and I did feel terrible for probably at least a month, ran all of the fears and all of the nonsense in my head, and then whatever happened to distract me from that, and suddenly it was like, oh, I'm fine. I'm okay. And as you said, make room for somebody or something that's better. And this is often the case in so many ways. We are sabotaging ourselves. What I loved about what you were saying, Phil, we sabotage ourselves to keep ourselves safe. But I think that the key word you've got to examine is not the word sabotage, but the word safe. What does safe mean to you? Because safe is often more of the same. Same equals safe. Well, if you grew up in dysfunction, same is pretty dysfunctional, right? So you're trying to keep it the same as your shitty childhood or your shitty first marriage or your shitty whatever it was, shitty first business, and you're actually stopping yourself getting to something different. But different will require a different set of skills, a different set of mindset, different set of heart set, feel set, etc. And that's unfamiliar, unsafe. And so we sabotage ourselves back into the old situation because it has predictability. And your brain is looking for familiarity because it calls familiar safe. But familiar and safe also equals being stuck. And this is the point I think you need to understand about what Phil's trying to have you understand here, is you've got to examine this process you have for yourself for keeping yourself stuck by pursuing the same or stopping something different when it may be the very thing you need. And you're leaning on things as your strength. And hey, I'm as guilty as any of you. Leaning on things as your strength that actually may very well be a strength in certain circumstances that are really poking you in the eye in other circumstances. You need to stop it. But it's getting that awareness and then putting that awareness into action, because awareness is only one level. Nobody got enlightened by awareness. You can't get enlightened without awareness, but you can't be enlightened by awareness. It's now, what am I going to do with that? And I really feel like that's what you're trying to have us lay out here, is have the awareness of the sequence and the application of the antidote. Is that correct?
Yeah, remember, there's all three within us. They all work together simultaneously. It is, which one are you using more of mostly? And you use the word safe. Well, I have a thing called the 3 S's. So one of the saboteurs focus on safety. The other one focuses on security, and the other one focuses on stability. I'll have people in a group, and I'll talk to one person who is that particular saboteur, and I'll use all their words. And they're like, yes, yes, yes. And I'll go to somebody who is not that, and then I'll explain to that same situation what they need to do in different words. And when they're like, yes, 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 and I'll go back to the first person and say, if I told you the same wording, would that resonate? Not really. So what we found was these words, all pertaining to this particular trait or their saboteur, is all synonymous, that allows them to get it more effectively. So by knowing someone's sequence and knowing what words to say, you are now reaching them on the subconscious level. But exactly, it's your safety, your security, and your stability that causes that protection within yourself, so you can move forward to succeed and to try new things, because that's what adversity is there. Adversity is there to evolve you. You either evolve or dissolve. They both happened at the same time and are needed for each to occur.
And to sort of put that into a context for you as you listen or watch this, is nothing has any meaning but the meaning you're giving it. And so as you give it that meaning, you are going to, quote, react, which means to act again rather than respond, right? But you're going to react in a way that is familiar. And so this is what you have to do. Is a deeper question for you is to just ask, what is the meaning I'm giving this? Because when all that shitstorm happened for you, Phil, I'm sure there was a meaning you were giving it at the time, which may not have been so empowering.
And I can't say those words here either. Go ahead.
But there also would have been a point where you changed the meaning. You examined the meaning and went, is this the meaning that's most empowering to me? And then you start to put in place your sequence, understanding how you work, and moving into the different categories to apply your antidote. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. It's understanding at this moment how I'm reacting compared to acting, right? Responding compared to reacting. And am I in a protective state by using my protection sequence, or am I using the antidote And by just focusing this one thing, a domino effect happens. You don't have to worry about all the other steps. You just focus on the one. Depending on how you push it, there will be a reaction or a different action by just focusing on one thing for the rest of your life.
And that's such a good thing to understand for all of us, is it's not doing a bunch of stuff. It's about doing the one thing, as you said, rather than focusing on the balloons at the end of the domino, just focusing on, well, what if I don't push that domino? Phil, thank you so much for being with us. I want to make sure that people know where they can find out more about you and all of your resources. Please tell people where they can find out more about those things.
Yeah, they can go to the tnowmethod.com, the tnowmethod.com. And thank you so much, Dov. I had a blast. Hope this was valuable for you and your audience.
And my employees too.
And your employees as well.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I really appreciate it. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, remember, those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe. Leaders who are committed to positively shaping the political and business landscape know that they've got to tap into what drives human behavior. I'm Dov Baron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe, because the unified, actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and for companies. Remember, we need your help in staying relevant, so please go to wherever it is that you tune into the show from and do us a favor. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show. It really makes a big difference, and we sincerely appreciate it. And of course, a big thank you to you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you may appear to be sabotaging yourself, but maybe you need to think about it as you're protecting yourself and what it is you're protecting yourself from, because maybe the thing you're protecting yourself from is actually your way out of the thing that holds you back. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.